On September 12, 1942, at Guadalcanal, a force of 800 U.S. Marines found themselves in a precarious situation that seemed to spell their doom. Lieutenant Colonel Red Mike Edson had received credible information indicating that approximately 2,500 Japanese soldiers were stealthily maneuvering through the dense jungle, with the clear intention of encircling his unit stationed on the ridge just south of Henderson Field. Standard military doctrine dictated a clear course of action. When facing a 3-to-1 numerical disadvantage and the threat of encirclement, retreat was the only logical option. The textbook solution was to seek more defensible terrain and request immediate reinforcements. However, Edson, after carefully assessing his weary and undersupplied Marines, who had no means of retreat, made a bold decision that flew in the face of conventional military wisdom. He commanded his men to consolidate their defenses, allowing the enemy to draw closer, effectively inviting complete encirclement. As the humid darkness of the Pacific jungle enveloped them, Japanese forces stealthily approached from 3 directions, fully expecting to crush the Americans in a swift and decisive night assault. But what transpired in the ensuing hours would shatter established notions of defensive warfare and transform a seemingly hopeless predicament into one of the most remarkably one-sided victories in the annals of the Marine Corps. The oppressive humidity of Guadalcanal's jungle clung to the Marines like a tangible presence as night descended upon the ridge on September 13th. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson moved through his defensive positions with a deliberate, almost fatalistic pace, fully aware of the daunting odds facing his men. The numbers were stark. 800 Marines against a confirmed force of 2,500 Japanese soldiers infiltrating the jungle below. While the statistics painted a grim picture, Edson knew that numbers rarely told the whole story. The ridge itself was an uninspiring feature, a low, undulating spine of coral and volcanic rock rising a mere 60 feet above the surrounding jungle, stretching approximately 1,000 yards from north to south. To military strategists studying maps in Washington, it appeared insignificant. However, to the Marines entrenched along its slopes, it represented the crucial line of defense between American control of Henderson Field and potential disaster in the Pacific. The airstrip lay a mere 800 yards to the north, close enough that they could hear the occasional rumble of aircraft engines igniting in the pre-dawn hours. Edson had meticulously positioned his forces with the precision of a chess master playing for his life. The 1st Raider Battalion held the northern section of the ridge nearest Henderson Field, while the 1st Parachute Battalion extended along the southern approaches. Together, they created overlapping fields of fire across the jungle approaches. Yet, Edson understood that firepower alone would not guarantee their survival. The Japanese had repeatedly demonstrated their willingness to endure staggering casualties to achieve their objectives, and Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi was advancing through the darkness with a force 3 times the size of Edson's. The Marines had endured over a month of grueling combat on Guadalcanal, and the unforgiving jungle had imparted invaluable lessons that no training manual could replicate. The stifling humidity turned every piece of metal into a scalding surface during the day, and coated everything in a slick layer of condensation at night. Canvas rotted within weeks, and food spoiled within days. Men shed precious weight and succumbed to debilitating tropical diseases. However, they had also learned to exploit the jungle's unique acoustics, honing their senses to detect the subtle sounds that betrayed enemy movement through the dense undergrowth. As Edson inspected his positions, he observed Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone meticulously adjusting the traverse mechanism on his Browning M1917 machine gun. The weapon, a venerable relic from the previous war, was water-cooled and weighed a hefty 41 pounds without its tripod. However, it possessed the capability to unleash a sustained rate of fire that could tear through human flesh at ranges up to 1,500 yards. Basilone had already distinguished himself in previous engagements, displaying the unwavering competence under fire that separated seasoned Marines from the fresh replacements arriving from the States. "How's your ammunition situation, Gunny?" Edson inquired, crouching beside the machine gun position. "Enough to make them think twice about coming up this hill, Colonel," Basilone responded, his voice radiating the quiet confidence that Edson had come to rely upon. "Though I wouldn't mind having a few more belts if the Japanese decide to get serious about this." Stay with us. The Battle of Edson's Ridge is one of the most remarkable stories of the Second World War, and we are just getting started. We would be grateful for your like and subscription. Tell us in the comments where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Private First Class. Robert Mard was dug in 20 yards to Basilone's left, his Springfield rifle meticulously cleaned, loaded, and bayonet fixed. The young Marine had arrived on Guadalcanal barely 3 weeks earlier, still bearing the fresh-faced look of stateside training camps, but the jungle had already begun its transformative work. His uniform hung loosely on his frame, and his eyes held the unmistakable alertness that came from knowing that death could strike without warning from any direction. The Japanese strategy, as Edson gleaned from intelligence reports and captured documents, hinged on speed and shock. Kawaguchi's forces had been navigating the treacherous jungle for 3 days, following trails that only the most seasoned guides could negotiate in daylight. Their plan called for a coordinated night assault from 3 directions, designed to overwhelm the American positions through sheer numerical superiority and the psychological impact of fighting in complete darkness. However, the Japanese had failed to account for the defensive preparations that Edson had diligently implemented over the preceding week. Every approach to the ridge had been meticulously studied, measured, and pre-registered for artillery fire. The Marines had cleared fields of fire through the dense jungle undergrowth, creating strategically designed killing zones that would funnel attacking forces into predetermined corridors. Wire obstacles, though limited by supply shortages, had been carefully positioned to slow and redirect enemy troops into the most effective engagement ranges. The Marines also possessed intangible advantages that would not appear on any intelligence report that Kawaguchi might have received. Their training emphasized individual initiative and adaptability, qualities that proved invaluable in the chaos of night combat. Unlike their Japanese counterparts, who relied heavily on rigidly coordinated group tactics, American Marines were trained to fight effectively as individuals when larger formations broke down under fire. As the night deepened, the sounds of the jungle began to undergo a subtle but significant transformation. The usual chorus of insects and nocturnal animals gradually yielded to an unnatural silence that every experienced Marine recognized as the unmistakable prelude to contact. Somewhere in the darkness below the ridge, thousands of Japanese soldiers were stealthily moving into position, their presence creating a palpable disturbance that even the jungle wildlife could sense. As darkness descended, Colonel Edson meticulously inspected the defensive arrangements, engaging in hushed conversations with squad leaders, and verifying the availability of ammunition. Each Marine was equipped with approximately 200 bullets, along with grenades, mortars, and the strategically placed machine guns that formed the bulwark of their defense. While not an excessive amount, it was deemed adequate for soldiers trained to maximize every shot. The colonel's radio transmitted updates from jungle outposts, revealing Japanese forces advancing along 3 distinct paths, thus validating the intelligence forecasts of a multifaceted attack. The enemy's proximity was such that their voices could occasionally be discerned through the dense foliage, uttering terse Japanese military commands. At 11:45 p.m., the first Japanese mortar rounds began to impact the ridge. The explosions seemed random and poorly synchronized, implying that General Kawaguchi's troops were still maneuvering into their designated positions and calibrating their indirect fire weaponry. Yet, the barrage achieved its intended psychological effect, signaling to the Marines that the anticipated battle was finally commencing. Edson established himself at the command post, a shallow trench fortified with sandbags, situated at the ridge's highest elevation. From this strategic vantage point, he had a comprehensive view of the entire defensive perimeter and could maintain communication with Henderson Field via radio. The airstrip's artillery units were prepared to offer support, their cannons preloaded and aimed at designated target zones. The jungle was plunged into pandemonium as the vanguard of Japanese infantry emerged from the tree line, their war cries reverberating across the ridge as they surged toward the Marine emplacements. The critical moment was at hand. The initial wave of Japanese infantry burst forth from the jungle like an overwhelming force, their voices roaring in the traditional Banzai battle cry that had instilled fear in Allied troops across the Pacific theater. However, as they ascended the ridge's slopes, they encountered an unforeseen obstacle in General Kawaguchi's tactical calculations. The Marines did not yield. They did not fall back. Instead, they unleashed a barrage of precisely aimed fire that transformed the hillside into a deadly killing field. Basilon's machine gun began its lethal operation at a distance of 800 yards, its heavy rounds tearing through the advancing Japanese ranks with devastating efficiency. The weapon's water-cooled mechanism allowed for continuous firing, a capability that standard bolt-action rifles could not match. And Basilone had strategically positioned his gun to dominate the primary route of approach. Each burst discharged 5 to 7 rounds in under 2 seconds, and at this range, every hit proved fatal. The Japanese assault had been predicated on traditional infantry tactics that emphasized swiftness and overwhelming force. General Kawaguchi's troops were expected to rapidly close the gap to American positions, leveraging darkness and numerical superiority to offset their limited firepower. However, the ridge's terrain presented unforeseen challenges that no amount of pre-battle scouting could have revealed. The Marines had devoted weeks to meticulously studying every approach, every contour in the land, every potential hiding spot that an attacking force might utilize. Private Mard peered through the sights of his Springfield rifle and squeezed the trigger. Observing a Japanese soldier falter and collapse 50 yards down the slope from his position. The young Marine smoothly operated the bolt action, ejecting the spent casing and loading a fresh round with the mechanical precision that months of rigorous training had ingrained into his muscle memory. Surrounding him, the sharp reports of American rifles created a consistent rhythm that punctuated the deeper roar of the machine guns. General Kawaguchi's fundamental misjudgment lay in his misunderstanding of American defensive doctrine. Japanese military philosophy stressed the spiritual supremacy of the attack, the conviction that resolute infantry could conquer any obstacle through sheer willpower. American doctrine, conversely, prioritized maximizing firepower and establishing interlocking arcs of fire that would decimate attacking forces before they could approach within effective range. The Marines had transformed the ridge into a fortress, meticulously designed to exploit every advantage afforded by modern weaponry. The Japanese forces advancing along the southern approaches encountered their initial shocking setback when American mortar rounds began to rain down among their ranks. The Marines had meticulously pre-plotted every likely avenue of approach, measuring distances and calculating firing solutions during daylight hours, when they could operate without fear of enemy observation. Now in the darkness, those calculations yielded significant results as high explosive rounds detonated with lethal accuracy among the densely packed Japanese infantry. Corporal Watanabe guided his squad through the undergrowth, desperately seeking cover as American bullets whizzed overhead and mortar fragments sliced through the jungle canopy. The experienced non-commissioned officer had participated in successful night assaults across the Pacific. But this situation was different. The American fire was too precise, too sustained, and too coordinated to be attributed to panicked defenders firing haphazardly into the darkness. These Marines were firing with purpose, and Japanese soldiers were dying faster than they could advance. The tactical reality that General Kawaguchi was only beginning to grasp became starkly evident as his second wave emerged from the jungle, only to find the ground ahead of them strewn with the bodies of their fallen comrades. The Marines had not only repelled the initial assault, but had done so with such devastating effectiveness that the attacking forces were already losing their cohesion. Japanese squad and platoon leaders, the seasoned non-commissioned officers, who maintained unit cohesion in combat, were being systematically eliminated by American marksmen who had learned to identify targets of opportunity by observing the muzzle flashes and movement patterns of the attacking infantry. Colonel Edson monitored the battle from his command post, receiving updates from his subordinate commanders and requesting artillery support from Henderson Field. The colonel understood that this was more than just another Japanese reconnaissance probe. General Kawaguchi had committed substantial forces to this assault, and the enemy's tenacity suggested that they regarded the ridge as a crucial objective. However, Colonel Edson also recognized that the Japanese were making fundamental errors in their approach, errors that his Marines were trained and equipped to exploit. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. I'm from Texas, and I think this video topic is very interesting. It's important to remember and learn from the sacrifices made during these historical battles. The American artillery situated at Henderson Field had pinpointed specific target zones surrounding the ridge. Subsequently, these artillery pieces unleashed a barrage of immense power, The 155mm howitzers demonstrated remarkable accuracy in delivering high-explosive projectiles, guided by forward observers who maintained constant contact with the gun crews throughout the initial bombardment. Each exploding shell generated a deadly fragmentation zone capable of disabling enemy infantry across a 40-yard radius, with the guns firing at a pace of 4 rounds each minute. Japanese battle strategies emphasized infiltration and close combat, but the terrain surrounding the ridge offered scant cover for large troop formations. The Marines had cleared fields of fire extending 300 yards in all directions, creating killing zones where attacking forces would be vulnerable to concentrated fire from multiple vantage points. Even under the cover of darkness, the muzzle flashes from Japanese weapons revealed their positions to American gunners, who had been trained to engage targets using sound and flash signatures. The third wave of the Japanese assault encountered an even more advanced defense, as Edson began to implement strategies that would become standard practice for American forces throughout the Pacific theater. Rather than simply maintaining fixed positions, Marine squads initiated limited counterattacks aimed at disrupting Japanese formations before they could organize for synchronized assaults. These small unit actions, often led by experienced non-commissioned officers, like Basilone, prevented the enemy from establishing firing positions within effective range of the ridge. Kawaguchi's forces were caught in a tactical nightmare that their training had not prepared them to face. The Americans were not behaving as Japanese intelligence had predicted based on previous engagements. Instead of retreating under pressure or collapsing when subjected to determined assault, the Marines fought with a professionalism that transformed every Japanese advantage into a weakness. The sustained rate of fire achievable by American weapons proved to be a game-changer as the battle progressed into its second hour. Japanese infantry, primarily armed with bolt-action rifles, found themselves outgunned by Marines who not only possessed superior firepower, but also had the tactical training to use it effectively. The Browning machine guns, reinforced by mortars and artillery, established an interconnected web of destruction that no amount of individual bravery could overcome. By midnight, Kawaguchi's assault had completely lost its momentum, with his forces scattered and disoriented across the jungle approaches to the ridge. The general was faced with a crucial decision that would determine the course of the battle: continue sending his remaining troops into what had become a killing field, or admit that his initial plan had failed and attempt to develop new tactics to deal with an enemy who defied Japanese expectations of American fighting ability. Stay with us as the story unfolds. The battle is far from over, and the next phase will reveal even more about the strategies and resilience of both sides. We would be very grateful for your like and subscription to our channel. Where are you watching from, and what are your thoughts on the battle so far? Share your comments below. The jungle was plunged into an unsettling silence as the fourth Japanese assault wave disintegrated into scattered groups of survivors, crawling back through the undergrowth. Kawaguchi had committed over 1,500 men to the attacks, and the ridge remained firmly under American control. But the general was far from giving up. In the pre-dawn darkness of September 14th, he prepared to gamble everything on a final, coordinated assault that would either break the Marine defense or destroy what was left of his command. Edson moved through his positions, checking ammunition supplies and redistributing his forces to cover the gaps that 4 hours of continuous combat had created in his defensive line. The Marines had performed exceptionally well, but they were showing the effects of sustained action. Private Mard had fired over 100 rounds from his Springfield rifle, more ammunition than many Marines expended in an entire month of training. His shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil, and his hands trembled slightly as he reloaded his 8-round clips by feel in the darkness. The colonel's main concern was ammunition for the machine guns. Bassilone's crew had fired nearly 3,000 rounds, changing barrels twice to prevent overheating, despite the weapon's water-cooled design. The gunnery sergeant reported that he had perhaps 500 rounds remaining, enough for another sustained engagement, but not sufficient for a prolonged battle. Similar reports came from the other machine gun positions scattered along the ridge, each crew rationing their remaining ammunition while maintaining their sectors of fire. Kawaguchi had learned from his earlier mistakes, and his final assault reflected a more sophisticated understanding of American defensive capabilities. Instead of launching massive frontal attacks that played to Marine strengths, he divided his remaining forces into smaller infiltration groups, tasked with penetrating the American perimeter and attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. The Japanese would sacrifice the psychological impact of banzai charges in favor of tactics that might actually succeed against disciplined defenders. The new Japanese approach became evident when Marine listening posts began reporting movement from sectors that had been quiet during the earlier assaults. Small groups of enemy soldiers were attempting to maneuver around the flanks of the American position, using ravines and dense vegetation to conceal their approach. These infiltrators carried light weapons and grenades, planning to get close enough to the Marine positions to neutralize key weapons like machine guns and mortars through surprise attacks. Edson responded by pulling his reserve forces from their positions behind the main defensive line and deploying them to counter the infiltration attempts. These were his most experienced Marines, men who had proven their ability to fight effectively in small groups without direct supervision. They moved through the jungle with the silent efficiency of hunters, using their knowledge of the terrain to intercept Japanese forces before they could reach the ridge. The ensuing combat was unlike anything in the previous assaults. Individual Marines found themselves engaged in close-quarters combat with Japanese soldiers who had penetrated to within 30 yards of key defensive positions. Mard heard movement in the undergrowth to his left and turned to see a Japanese infiltrator rising from concealment with a grenade in his hand. The young Marine's rifle cracked once, and the enemy soldier collapsed, the grenade rolling harmlessly down the slope to explode harmlessly among the trees below. Gunnery Sergeant Bassilone's position was directly threatened when a Japanese unit managed to get within throwing distance of his machine gun nest. Basilone and his team engaged in hand-to-hand combat, using pistols and rifles, as enemy soldiers tried to storm their sandbagged position. A Japanese soldier even made it to the machine gun itself before Basilone eliminated him with a burst from his Thompson submachine gun. The dead soldier's body fell across the tripod of the weapon. The intensity of the close-quarters combat created widespread disorder along the defense line, but it also exposed a critical flaw in Kawaguchi's revised strategy. By dividing his forces into small infiltration groups, the general had given up the mass and force needed for successful breakthroughs. Instead of focusing his remaining strength on a single point in the American line, he had dispersed his forces across multiple targets, enabling the Marines to defeat each group individually. The American artillery continued to play a crucial role, but now the guns were targeting locations identified by forward observers who were sometimes just yards away from enemy positions. The closeness of the combatants made these fire missions extremely dangerous, requiring precise timing and navigation to prevent friendly fire incidents. Shell bursts briefly illuminated the jungle, revealing fleeting glimpses of Japanese soldiers desperately seeking shelter among the tangled roots and fallen trees. The tactical situation had now developed into the kind of combat that greatly favored the training and gear of the American forces. The Marines excelled at small unit actions that demanded individual initiative and adaptability. Their weapons were designed for continuous fire and close-range precision. Above all, their doctrine emphasized aggressive counterattacks that prevented enemy forces from solidifying gains or establishing firing positions. As dawn approached, the nature of the battle shifted once again. Kawaguchi's tactics of infiltration had failed to achieve any breakthrough, and the daylight would expose his remaining forces to devastating fire from American positions that held commanding views. The general was faced with the prospect of continuing his attacks in broad daylight against defenders who had already demonstrated their ability to inflict catastrophic losses on his troops. Shortly after 5 a.m., the Japanese began to retreat, their movement covered by mortar fire that was poorly coordinated and largely ineffective. Marine observers watched through binoculars as scattered groups of enemy soldiers retreated through the jungle, abandoning equipment and wounded comrades in their haste to escape the killing zone around the ridge. Edson instructed his forces to maintain their positions and avoid pursuit operations that might expose them to ambushes or lead them into prepared enemy positions. The colonel recognized that his main mission was defensive, and he had achieved that mission with a tactical victory that surpassed all reasonable expectations. His 800 Marines had not only held their ground against overwhelming odds, but had also essentially destroyed an enemy force 3 times their size. The aftermath of the battle revealed the true extent of the Japanese defeat. Reconnaissance patrols counted over 700 enemy bodies on the approaches to the ridge, with many more wounded soldiers evacuated during the retreat. American casualties numbered fewer than 50 killed and wounded, a ratio that would have seemed impossible to military analysts studying the preliminary force dispositions. Kawaguchi's failure at the ridge effectively ended Japanese offensive capabilities on Guadalcanal and marked the beginning of a strategic shift that would characterize the remainder of the Pacific War. The Marines had demonstrated that disciplined defenders with superior firepower could defeat numerically superior attackers, regardless of their reputation for fanatical courage. More importantly, they had shown that American forces could adapt their tactics to exploit enemy weaknesses while maximizing their own technological and training advantages. The ridge that would forever be known as Edson's Ridge had become the graveyard of Japanese hopes for victory on Guadalcanal. The 800 Marines who defended it had proven that superior numbers meant nothing against superior preparation, training, and leadership. The first rays of dawn painted the jungle canopy in shades of gold and green as Edson surveyed the battlefield that stretched below the ridge. His observations defied every prediction that staff officers had made about Japanese resilience and fighting capability. Bodies lay scattered across the approaches in groupings that told the story of each failed assault, their positions marking the high watermark of what had been one of the most concentrated enemy offensives in the Pacific War. The silence that had settled over the ridge carried an almost supernatural quality, broken only by the distant calls of tropical birds resuming their morning routines. Private Mard emerged from his fighting position for the first time in 6 hours, his legs unsteady beneath him as circulation returned to limbs that had remained cramped in the same defensive posture throughout the night. The young Marine looked out across the killing field with the hollow-eyed stare of someone who had witnessed industrialized death on a scale that no training exercise could simulate. Japanese equipment lay abandoned among the bodies. Rifles with their distinctive long bayonets, light mortars that had never found their range, and canvas packs spilling personal effects across the jungle floor. Base alone oversaw the cleaning of his machine gun, running patches through the barrel to remove the carbon fouling that accumulated after firing nearly 4,000 rounds. The weapon had performed flawlessly throughout the engagement, its water-cooled design preventing the overheating that would have rendered it useless during the most critical phases of the battle. But the gunnery sergeant understood that mechanical reliability meant nothing without the tactical skill to employ weapons effectively, and he had proven that American machine gun doctrine could devastate attacking infantry when properly implemented. Stay with us, and be sure to watch until the end of the video. We would appreciate your like and subscription. Let us know in the comments where you are from and what you think about the video topic. As the sun rose on the aftermath, a stark reality of devastation began to unfold as Marine patrols ventured across the scarred landscape to gather intelligence and undertake the grim task of counting the enemy dead. Kawaguchi had boldly thrown the weight of approximately 2,500 men, equivalent to 3 full battalions, into the assault comprised of some of his most seasoned and hardened combat units. But now, fewer than 800 of these soldiers could still offer organized resistance, and many were wounded or scattered, lost in the chaos of the retreat, their units torn asunder. What amplified the magnitude of this defeat for Japanese strategic calculations was the caliber of the troops that had been decimated. These were not green recruits or second-rate garrison soldiers, but seasoned veterans who had successfully campaigned across the Pacific theater. A significant number of Kawaguchi's men had previously participated in the conquest of the Dutch East Indies and the Philippines, amassing invaluable combat experience that Japanese planners deemed crucial for future offensive operations targeting American forces. The loss of such a wealth of experienced personnel dealt a significant blow to Japanese military capabilities, its impact extending far beyond the immediate tactical situation on Guadalcanal. Edson's tactical triumph resonated far beyond the immediate battlefield, reaching the highest echelons of military strategy on both sides of the Pacific conflict. For the Americans, the successful defense of the ridge served as a compelling demonstration that Japanese forces were not invincible. It proved that superior numbers and fanatical resolve could be overcome through professional competence and the effective application of firepower. This pivotal lesson would shape American tactical doctrine throughout the remainder of the war, instilling in commanders a renewed confidence in their training, tactics, and equipment when facing seemingly insurmountable odds. Stay with us. The Japanese response to this crushing defeat revealed fundamental weaknesses in their strategic thinking, vulnerabilities that had been masked by earlier victories against less prepared adversaries. Kawaguchi's after-action reports attributed his failure to inadequate artillery support and insufficient reconnaissance time. However, these explanations sidestepped the fundamental issue. Japanese infantry tactics were designed for campaigns against opponents lacking the firepower and tactical sophistication of American Marine units. Additional preparation could not have compensated for these intrinsic doctrinal limitations. American intelligence officers, in their interrogation of captured Japanese soldiers, discovered that Kawaguchi's forces had been led to believe that they would face minimal resistance from demoralized American defenders, who would crumble under a determined assault. This profound misjudgment of Marine capabilities mirrored broader Japanese misconceptions about American fighting prowess, misconceptions that would prove exceedingly costly throughout the Pacific War. The notion that Western soldiers lacked the spiritual fortitude for sustained combat was decisively refuted. The strategic ramifications of the battle extended beyond immediate military considerations, influencing the broader trajectory of the Pacific War. Henderson Field remained firmly in American hands, providing a crucial base for air operations that would systematically strangle Japanese supply lines to their remaining forces on Guadalcanal. Unable to reinforce or resupply their positions, Japanese commanders faced the daunting prospect of waging a defensive campaign with dwindling resources against an enemy who controlled both the sea approaches and the airspace above the island. For the Marines who had fought valiantly on the ridge, the victory served as a powerful validation of training methods and tactical doctrines that some had questioned during their months of rigorous preparation in the United States. The emphasis on individual marksmanship, small unit tactics, and the aggressive employment of supporting weapons had proven remarkably effective against an enemy renowned for military prowess. More importantly, they had demonstrated to themselves and to observers throughout the Pacific that American forces could not only match Japanese combat effectiveness, but could surpass it when properly led and equipped. The human cost of the victory, while comparatively light by the brutal standards of Pacific warfare, nonetheless represented irreplaceable losses for units with no immediate prospect of receiving reinforcements. 43 Marines had perished during the engagement, with another 97 wounded so severely that they required medical evacuation. Each casualty embodied years of training and combat experience that could not be readily replaced, underscoring the critical importance of tactical victories that achieved strategic objectives while minimizing friendly losses. Edson's personal leadership during the battle became a textbook example of small unit command, analyzed and emulated throughout the Marine Corps for decades to come. His calculated decision to allow Japanese forces to surround his position had appeared to be tactical suicide to observers unfamiliar with the defensive advantages that the ridge afforded. By compelling the enemy to attack uphill against fortified positions, he had maximized the effectiveness of American firepower, while mitigating Japanese advantages in numbers and close-quarters combat proficiency. The ridge, forevermore bearing Edson's name, represented more than just another tactical victory in the protracted struggle for control of the Pacific. It signaled the dawn of a fundamental shift in the balance of military effectiveness that would define the remainder of the war against Japan. American forces had proven that superior training, equipment, and leadership could overcome any advantage in numbers or fighting spirit that their adversaries might possess. The lessons learned in the steamy jungles of Guadalcanal would resonate across every battlefield, from the Solomon Islands to the shores of Japan itself, carried forward by Marines who had witnessed the genesis of American tactical supremacy in the Pacific theater of operations. The radio reports flooding into Japanese headquarters on the morning of September 14th conveyed a reality that Kawaguchi could scarcely fathom. His brigade, which had numbered over 3,000 men just days earlier, had effectively ceased to exist as a cohesive fighting force. Unit commanders who managed to maintain contact reported casualties exceeding 60%, with many companies reduced to fewer than 20 effective soldiers. The 35th Infantry Brigade, once considered among the most formidable formations in the Imperial Japanese Army, had been shattered against the ridge in a single night of fierce combat. We would be grateful for your like and subscription. Please write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. In the inky blackness of that fateful night, a fierce struggle unfolded, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. The surviving soldiers, broken and battered, emerged from the dense jungle in scattered groups. Many bore the burden of wounded comrades. Their progress slowed, making them easy targets for pursuing American forces. Japanese military strategy had historically overlooked the complexities of large-scale retreats, rigidly adhering to the belief that victory or death were the only paths for the emperor's soldiers. Now, Kawaguchi was confronted with the daunting mission of extracting the remnants of his command while trying to keep a semblance of order to stave off total disintegration. Captain Suzuki, one of the few remaining company commanders under Kawaguchi, had a front-row seat to the final assault from a forward observation post that offered a clear view of the American defensive line. His report detailed the unwavering discipline of the Marines, who maintained a steady stream of fire even as Japanese soldiers closed within a mere 20 yards of their fortified positions. Suzuki observed that the Americans never seemed to panic or falter in their tactical coordination, responding to each Japanese advance with precisely coordinated counterfire that efficiently eliminated the attackers. American intelligence officers, carefully monitoring Japanese radio communications, detected a growing sense of desperation in the enemy's transmissions as unit commanders frantically tried to account for their dispersed forces. The intercepted messages revealed that Kawaguchi had lost contact with more than half of his subordinate units, many of which had been completely wiped out, leaving no survivors to report their fate. The units that managed to maintain communication painted a consistent picture of catastrophic losses and utter tactical failure. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Leave a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The impact of the defeat reverberated far beyond the immediate battlefield, influencing Japanese strategic planning throughout the Solomon Islands campaign. High Command had envisioned Kawaguchi's brigade as the vanguard of a larger offensive aimed at reclaiming Henderson Field and neutralizing American air power in the area. The failure of this assault led to a fundamental reassessment of Japanese capabilities, exposing a significant underestimation of American defensive strength by military planners in Tokyo. For the Marines holding the ridge, the scale of their triumph became evident as patrols returned, with reports of enemy equipment and casualties strewn across several square miles of jungle. The sheer volume of abandoned Japanese supplies told the story of an army in full retreat. Rifles discarded to expedite their escape, mortars abandoned when their crews were killed or wounded, and personal belongings scattered along every trail leading away from the battlefield. Intelligence specialists meticulously catalogued the captured weapons and documents, piecing together a comprehensive understanding of Japanese tactical organization and equipment that would prove invaluable in future engagements. Private Mard was part of one of the reconnaissance patrols that ventured beyond the immediate perimeter to assess the extent of Japanese losses. What he witnessed during that patrol would be etched into his memory forever. The bodies of enemy soldiers lay in positions that told the story of each failed assault, their equipment and weapons scattered in patterns that revealed the intensity of American defensive fire. Many Japanese positions showed the unmistakable signs of direct hits from artillery or mortar rounds, with entire squads obliterated in single explosions that left craters surrounded by debris and human remains. Basilone oversaw the redistribution of ammunition from Japanese sources, carefully examining captured rifles and machine guns to evaluate their capabilities and potential applications on the battlefield. The Japanese weapons displayed impressive craftsmanship, but revealed design philosophies that differed significantly from American approaches. While American weapons emphasized sustained fire and mechanical reliability, Japanese designs prioritized accuracy and conservation of ammunition, reflecting different tactical doctrines and manufacturing capabilities. The strategic implications of the battle resonated through both military hierarchies, as senior commanders sought to comprehend the events that had unfolded on the ridge. American generals saw confirmation of training programs and tactical doctrines developed during peacetime but never truly tested in combat. The emphasis on small unit leadership, individual marksmanship, and the coordinated use of supporting weapons had proven devastatingly effective against an enemy renowned for its military prowess. Japanese military leaders faced the more challenging task of explaining how elite infantry units had been decimated by a numerically inferior enemy fighting from prepared positions. Traditional Japanese military thinking emphasized spiritual strength and aggressive tactics as the keys to victory, concepts that had proven inadequate against American firepower and defensive expertise. The defeat forced a painful acknowledgement that technological superiority and professional training could overcome advantages in numbers and fighting spirit. Kawaguchi's personal fate exemplified the wider ramifications of the tactical disaster. The general, once regarded as one of Japan's most capable field commanders, saw his career effectively ended by the debacle on Guadalcanal. His superiors in Tokyo viewed the defeat as evidence of inadequate leadership and flawed tactical judgment, criticisms that overlooked the fundamental problems with Japanese doctrine and strategic assessment that had made the disaster inevitable. The medical aftermath of the battle shed further light on the Japanese defeat. American corpsmen treating wounded prisoners discovered that many enemy soldiers suffered from malnutrition and tropical diseases, significantly impairing their combat effectiveness. The Japanese logistical system, stretched to its breaking point by extended supply lines and American air attacks, had been unable to sustain fighting units at full strength during prolonged campaigns in harsh environments. In severely challenging operational theaters, the losses suffered by American forces, while deeply felt by their communities and military organizations, demonstrated a strikingly advantageous exchange rate. This outcome affirmed the soundness of the tactical approaches employed during the conflict. The sacrifice of 43 Marines, along with 97 wounded, had resulted in devastating losses for the Japanese, exceeding a ratio of 20-1. This disparity highlighted the inherent defensive strengths of the terrain and the enhanced capabilities of American weaponry and combat strategies. Shiakra. The repercussions of this triumph extended beyond the immediate military context, significantly influencing American public sentiment and reshaping Japanese strategic evaluations across the Pacific theater. The announcement of the successful defense resonated deeply within the United States, particularly at a time when public confidence in the nation's prospects in the Pacific War was wavering. The Marine victory offered tangible proof that Japanese forces could be overcome through meticulous planning and skilled execution, bolstering ongoing support for the extensive military buildup that would ultimately prove pivotal. The ridge, now quiet under the afternoon sun, bore the scars of battle, a silent witness to this pivotal moment in the Pacific campaign, its slopes littered with remnants of the intense struggle. Stay with us as we delve deeper into the lasting impact of this battle on the broader conflict. Your continued support is invaluable, and we would be grateful for a like and subscription. For the 800 Marines who had tenaciously defended their position against overwhelming enemy numbers, the victory served as an affirmation of their training, leadership, and the collective strength of disciplined soldiers united by a shared purpose. It reinforced their belief in the principles of warfare, the importance of strong leadership, and the power of a cohesive unit, fighting for a cause they deeply believed in. I'm from California, and I think this video topic highlights the incredible resilience and strategic brilliance of the Marines during a critical point in the Pacific War.